Alright, Aiden, what are we doing today?
Today, we are playing Netflix Roulette, sponsored by Real Good. We're not actually sponsored by Real Good. But we are going to be spinning the wheel. We have our streaming services set up here. And we're going to see what we're forced to watch. All genres, any score, movies or TV shows. We could be watching anything. Could be fucking...
And how many are we gonna do today?
12? 3? I don't know. How many are we gonna do?
I guess we'll
figure it out.
we'll play it by ear. Let's see what we get. If we get all TV shows, then So are we gonna pick a random episode? Are we gonna have to look up the episodes and then put them in a randomizer to figure out?
Randomize the episodes if it's a TV show. Let's get the drum roll, please.
Wait.
21?
Yes.
What did we get?
It's called Seis Manos. 2019 anime. That's not an anime. That is not made in Japan. Orphans raised by a martial arts master are plunged into a mystery involving demonic powers, drug cartels, ancient rituals, and... That's all it says.
What's it
what
on?
is this available on?
Netflix.
Okay. Seis Manos. What are you doing?
Don't we have to select the episode?
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we were going to do that on Seis Manos episodes IMDb.
Oh, I guess we don't have to do this on camera, do we?
Well, I mean, we're already doing it, so. It looks like there are 8 episodes.
Number randomizer.
Random.org. Pick a number from 1 to 8. We will be watching episode 7.
Episode 7. Going in on the...
Coming in
near the end of the series, we'll get a bit of the climax.
Okay, so... Yep, we'll be back to talk about this movie very shortly in editing time.
Okay, guys, so we streamed our first show. And that show was Seis Manos, episode 7, Between This World and the Next. So, Aiden, what happened in Seis Manos, Between This World and the Next?
Seis Manos. We came in at episode 7, which is the second to the last one. There's a guy named Mono, whose eyebrows turned white. There was a lady cop who could do exorcisms. Danny Trejo played a monster man, and they kicked his leg off. Someone was a witch.
It was the mom to the Danny Trejo. Danny Trejo's mom was a witch.
Yeah.
And then the 3 siblings, the exorcism cop and the black lady, had to stop the witch.
And the witch possessed the body of someone who was dead but then came back to life or something. So I have no clue what the overarching plot is here. Or the context for it. So anyway, Connor, what did you think of Seis Manos?
Well, you know, I didn't really love it. I mean, we came in pretty late in the story, so we're missing a lot of context. At the start of this episode, we have the sister of the 3 siblings, and she's talking to some sensei who, from what I gathered, trained them?
I think it's the grandpa.
No, because she was talking about how he trained the evil threat of the show or something, or some evil guy she trained, and now they have to clean up his mess, basically. She was all angry about that. Well, anyways, the sister of the group was possessed, and I guess, like, the brother, his eyebrow turned white, so I guess that means he's gonna go corrupt. And once his hair turns white, I guess he's evil. It's really hard hard to follow. Granted, we came in the 7th episode. But as far as it goes, the animation was kind of cheap looking.
Very cheap looking.
It ran at like slideshow pace, so if a character would run, it was like they would run across screen and it would be like 12 frames of animation, which is pretty cheap, especially considering it's already cheap looking Flash animation. The fight scenes were creative and looked kind of cool, but the animation was cheap as shit. The voice acting was okay, nothing spectacular. Most of the time, in this episode at least, all the characters kind of just stood there and watched while one character fought another, which seems to be somewhat of an anime trope. You even look at things like Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's kind of the format.
You can definitely tell that the budget went entirely into the fight scenes.
Right. It basically felt like a really fucking cheap anime. And being that it's only 8 episodes long, I would hope that it would have better animation. Like you look at like Castlevania, that has pretty good animation. But I guess since this was like an unknown anime that Netflix begrudgingly greenlit, that's what they got. This has this kind of has the foreign anime problem you see with a lot of shows. But the difference is like something like Avatar: The Last Airbender is actually well animated and people actually cared. Well, I do believe there were anime fans behind this show. It doesn't necessarily feel like the budget they were given could really put their vision to screen. Maybe if I watched the whole thing, I would have thought it was okay, but honestly, this episode was pretty much all fighting, all conflict. We kind of come in near the climax of the show, and it kind of just seems boring, and the cliffhanger kind of implied, like, the next episode's just fighting too. It was okay. It just felt kind of cheap. And it's not something I'll remember, and it's not something I particularly want to continue watching. So, Aiden, what did you think of Seis Manos?
It's pretty hard to discuss in whole, just because we only saw one episode. The animation's horrible. Like, outside of a couple moments in the fight scenes, a lot of it is static shots, a lot of low frame rate.
The 3D stock aspects, like the cop car was really jarring looking. It was like a cop car they were driving around in, and it was like over texturized but looked like a fucking PS2 game graphic, but everything else is pretty just low grade, generic anime aesthetic, so it looked really out there and bad, and was obviously just a cheap cost cutting measure.
Everything's got that kind of generic vibe to it, where like it's a story like there's a Mexican witch and she's evil and they have to do a fucking exorcism, and there's a cop and there's another cop and they're all related, and it's just like all these cheesy tropes and cliches just mashed together into uninspired, bland-looking anime, and throw in a little bit of gore for shock value, and you got Seis Manos. It's nothing special. I wouldn't call it horrible, even just this little snapshot we saw, but
yeah,
it's pretty much a big old pile of nothing.
I was also kind of confused. Did the main characters have powers? Because they pretty much just did kung fu.
Some of them did.
But then the fucking one skinny brother, his hair started turning white and he was getting like corrupted.
Well, the cop lady said she could do magic too, and she did an exorcism.
That was a fucking
she didn't do
weird
anything
scene.
else,
She
though.
would sweep it away, sweep it away. She just said sweep it away like 6,000 times. Pretty weird. They didn't really want to go creative or do like cool shit with the exorcism. Also, the fucking subject of the exorcism was like knocked out, so she kind of just stood there, and like once she almost woke up and like struggled for a second, but we didn't see like some exorcism shit where she was like moving her limbs around weird and garbage, which would have been kind of cool. She kind of just laid there on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get a real impression of something like this from, I mean, even if you watch the whole thing, it probably wouldn't leave much of an impression, and that's just my first impression.
Anyways, that was Seis Manos, so we're gonna do another random pick after this cut.
So it's your turn to roll the roulette.
Alright, let's go.
What are you hoping for? What are you hoping for?
Either something good or something short. Long-haired businessman, 1 season. What is this on? Amazon by Funny or Die.
Oh no.
How many episodes are there? 7.
How long are the episodes? 16 minutes. Okay, well
That
at least you got your wishes short.
So there's 7 episodes. Let's go to random.org. You guys ready? 2.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Fucking all these damn tabs. all these damn tabs. Wait. So wait, what number was
2.
2. Okay.
So Connor, it's your turn to spin the roulette. Roll the roulette.
Okay.
What are you hoping for?
Either something short or something that's not shit. Alright, God. Let's go. Something in the Rain. Looks like some sort of Korean couple thing. It's a Netflix show.
Is it a show?
It's
Okay.
Korean show.
Oh, this is going to be a good one. Also known as Bapjol Sajuan Yepen Numa.
Wait, what? Oh, seasons. 1 season. Let's click the season. Oh, God. Alright, how many episodes are there? 16 episodes. Let's generate our number. Generate an episode. Papa's got 10. And we're looking at episode 1.10. Jin Ah's mother doesn't take news of her daughter's relationship too well. So I take it this is some sort of sitcom by Koreans. Or Japanese or something. I can't. Not very good at telling the difference between
Jinna is Korean.
Asians, but yeah. So we'll watch the episode. Something in the Rain.
Hopefully they're short.
Hopefully it's short. Hopefully it's subtitled. Hopefully it's because this could easily be a 42-minute episode and not a.
Well, it has an English title, so it's probably in English, and it's on Netflix.
It's probably dubs. Maybe it'll be funny. Maybe it'll be good. Who knows?
Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe I'm.
Time to watch.
This is gonna bring some This game is gonna bring some creative ideas to the table. Okay. Stop. Stop filming me. Stop filming me.
Alright, Connor, what do you have to say for yourself?
Hi. This is the start of our second segment. Originally, we were gonna watch some sort of Korean K-drama. It's a TV series, and this is an hour and a half long. Really fucking boring. I don't understand what's happening. So we're not doing it. So I'm introducing a new rule. If it's in the English language, we gotta watch it. If it's outside of the English language, we have veto capabilities. So that's the new rule here. So let's go. We can just leave this running. Let's just go.
Alright, time for an all new roll. No more K drama.
Wow.
Probably. We could roll another K drama, but
it looks like we have a lot of. It looks like we have a lot of good movies that we could possibly roll. Let's do a spin. A spin of fate. Antonio Lopez, 1976 fashion and disco. Okay.
Looks like an Amazon Prime one to me, but
Okay.
double check.
It's a movie, at least. It seems to be in the English language.
Okay, so that should
So
be
it's
on
our
Prime.
Stars subscription.
Yeah. Oh, wait, on Prime. What the fuck is that called?
Oops. It's called Sex and...
Antonio something. Sex and
Sex...
fashion.
Antonio Stars. Oops. Antonio Lopez, Sex, Fashion, and Disco movie. So, as you can see, we'll,
He looks like a hunky man. Would you call Antonio Lopez hunky man?
Sure.
Alright, let's watch.
First documentary review on the channel, I believe.
Probably.
Okay. Well, looks like a good movie. Looks like it's in the English language.
That it does? Okay, well.
Yay.
We just finished our second film on our Netflix Roulette. Or our second event of the night. The second thing we watched was Antonio Lopez 1976 Fashion and Disco, which is a documentary. Connor, give us a brief rundown of what this documentary is about.
This documentary follows the work of Antonio Lopez very loosely, but is mostly just random models and friends of Antonio Lopez stroking their egos for an hour and a half. So, Aiden, what did you think of Antonio Lopez 1970s Sex, Fashion, and Disco?
It's pretty awful. Antonio Lopez, his artwork is pretty good, and there are aspects of his life that are fairly interesting, but at the same time, a lot of it is pretty much like standard rich fashion socialite stuff from the 60s. It's just like, oh, he did a bunch of drugs, they threw really weird parties, he traveled to Paris, he had lots of sex, and then at the end he gets AIDS. Oh. But so much of this movie, like you said, is like just, there's like 20 minutes at the start dedicated to him, and then they talk about how he died. And the entire middle is just a bunch of random people who knew him talking about how that he'd like just telling like stories about, like, one time I was in France. Me and Antonio went off somewhere, and then I went to a fucking party and got laid a bunch. It's like, what the fuck does this have to do with Antonio Lopez?
Yeah, there's 45 minutes of the hour and a half runtime has nothing to do with Antonio Lopez.
He's not all that interesting, truthfully. Like, as a subject.
I think he might have actually been interesting. Here's the problem.
They didn't focus.
They didn't have a narrative in this movie at all.
Yeah.
Most documentaries that are really interesting have a narrative, and even if they're interview based like this, it isn't just old people rambling about the good old days. It's, wow, his work inspired this. He grew up in, because he was like a Puerto Rican immigrant who moved to New York young and then became this big fashion guy who ended up influencing a bunch of people, was in squares with all these big artists like Andy Warhol and stuff. That's the interesting shit.
Yeah,
you know, focus on his life more. But everything is glanced over in favor of
people
I
telling
had
their
tons
party
of sex.
stories and how they go with, like, half this movie is basically just Andy Warhol stories.
And some guy named Carl, who I must have missed a second because they just wouldn't shut the fuck up about this Carl guy. I think it was the guy who like took pictures and he was like a professional picture guy who was friends with Antonio for a bit, but like half the stories were about Carl.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very bad narrative. It's well shot. It sounds nice. It looks nice in general. The editing is decent, but there's just like no substance to this story. I don't know if they started shooting it and they just like kept getting sidelined and for some reason edited it all in, or what the fuck happened, but it's a mess. It's vaguely interesting at times, but for the most part it's just like a bunch of old people's random stories about doing way too much drugs and fucking... Connor, what'd you think of Antonio Lopez 1970 Sex Fashion Disco? Quite the title.
Like we were already talking about, I feel like Antonio Lopez has an interesting story in there. I actually really liked his art. And truthfully, this documentary was really well edited. Really well, the cinematography was done really well, how they made everything blend, and even the sound editing was really nice. The problem is the majority of this does focus on like the models he was around. It wasn't brief stories, it was all stories. Like, yeah, it's not bad to have like a story like, oh, we went out and partied and we'd have a bunch of freaky sex. But that's a throwaway line, not an hour of the movie. Or, you know, you can talk about how those times meant to you, but the main focus should be Antonio Lopez, and this movie wasn't really about that.
Yeah, we never... I mean, even if you set it to focus in the 70s so you don't cover his early life, there has to be some sort of, like, story.
Yeah.
The only thing that connects all these stories is that they usually had Antonio in them somewhere. And even that's not always true.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I could never really, like, get into any of the characters either. Like, look at, like, we watched, Three Identical Strangers recently. And if you look at something like that, the majority of the documentary takes place when the, you know, when these people were adults or after they met. But it covers each of their younger formative years and stuff, which I think is a little important to, like, get invested in their story. It talked more about their problems. It really built up a narrative where I feel like Antonio and both of these, I would say honestly, aesthetically, this documentary is one of the like best documentaries I've seen. Like, it has great cinematography. It's really visually nice to look at, and the sound editing is great. It's just like, I'm never invested in Antonio. I'm never invested in any of the models. It's just like someone's like, wow, it was so much fun. I'd have tons of sex. And then someone else says, wow, she was so beautiful back in the day. Then they'd cut back to that girl and she'd be like, yeah, I did a bunch of drugs and had a bunch of sex. And me and Antonio had sex. And then someone else would cut away and be like,
And be like,
I'm a
Andy
pretentious
Warhol would
person.
throw a party and we'd all have our titties out and he'd be filming it. And then we'd release it as an art movie.
Yeah, and they'd be like, these were some of the greatest movies of the time. It's like, no, I've seen portions of one of Andy Warhol's movies that are fucking awful. I'm pretty sure, like, didn't MST3K do, was that hit? No, he had a Batman movie. I was thinking that Batwoman, like, counterfeit movie that came out that they did was Andy Warhol, but he did the Batman.
About? Yeah, he did the Batman knockoff.
Yeah, I've seen parts of that movie, and it's just like, I don't know. It would be like if like Instagram models today talked about their lives or something, but without narrative. Like, it's not really interesting to hear about 65-year-old people saying, "Oh, me in the 1970s, I had tons of sex."
This would be like someone making a Jake Paul fucking documentary and the whole movie was just a bunch of Instagram thoughts talking about how they met him at a party once and did a bunch of blow.
Basically what it was. I mean, more or less. I mean, I'm sure in 40 years we'll probably get a documentary like that. I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, this is more or less, you know, more or less that. Like, the narrative isn't very interesting. I didn't find the people very interesting. Like, I feel like if there was a more sound narrative, like, they should have had somebody, and I understand the main player is Antonio and his boyfriend, Anthony, or whatever his fucking name is, was dead at the point of this documentary, but you needed somebody close to the situation to guide it if you do a narrative like this where there's like no narration and stuff. Like, you need someone to guide it or have a general thesis that everyone's talking around, right? To guide it. That's what like Three Identical Strangers did. The two brothers that were still alive when the documentary came out basically guided the documentary and how it was told, and it followed a narrative, and anyone else interviewed followed that narrative. That's how you do it. You put together a story, essentially, and you have people explain the story, and you edit it together, and it can be a nice documentary. This was... So what did you think about your time with Antonio?
It's
and
really,
I'm assuming they all talked for 2 hours, and then...
It's really jarring, too, because, like, the movie, basically, like, the last 10 minutes, they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, Antonio got AIDS and died. And, like, nobody ever talks about the repercussions of his lifestyle.
His legacy or anything.
It's just like, here's a bunch of fun stories about when I did a bunch of fucking drugs with him. And then at the end of the movie, the narrator's like, and then Antonio got AIDS and died.
No, there's no narrator.
Whatever,
It was the fucking old guy started crying. It was like, he died of AIDS. And, like, no one else really fucking said anything about it. That should be, like, an impactful moment. Because, like, the 10 minutes before it, it's about he met this, like, Japanese model. And then they kind of go off track and kind of forget about Antonio for 15 minutes while they blab on about this boring fucking model that no one cares about anymore. And then they just abruptly cut to Antonio died of AIDS, and they talk about it for, I would say, 3 minutes. They talk about how Antonio was sick, and they're like, wow, he started to really get sick, and then he died. And it just, the whole movie feels so egotistical because it's like everyone here is just talking about their time. Or it's either egotistical or poorly directed. I can't really tell because I don't know if everyone wanted to talk about their time with Antonio to feel special. Although they all said, like, we were part of the movement with led by Antonio. Like, Antonio was a better artist than Andy Warhol. Fucking Jesus Christ, I wish he was Antonio and shit. And then it was like, in 2 minutes they glaze over the fact that he died, and it kind of makes all the other stories, like, trivial.
It's not even like they glaze over. They mentioned very briefly at the start that he was like a teacher in some capacity, and they just glaze over that.
He was like a student, and then he got hired, and he was like hanging out at the thing.
Yeah, something like that.
Also, Antonio Lopez would like find 15-year-old girls on the street and draw them and then bang them, apparently, and that's just like glorified in the film.
For his death to have an impact, we have to know something about Antonio, and the only thing we ever learn about him is that he did a whole fucking ton of drugs, fucked kids and dogs.
They said he didn't even fucking... Antonio didn't do drugs. Everyone else talked about how they did drugs.
Okay, whatever. Antonio banged everything that walked.
Antonio banged everything that walked, and he was a good artist, but it's only... Apparently they... Like, I think everyone just kind of talked for an hour, and how they did it was... Or like a couple-hour interview, and then it was like a half hour of them talking about the art, so that's what they put at the start, and then the rest was just about parties and drugs that everyone around Antonio did. So it was uninteresting. Like, and honestly, when I like saw the idea of this, like, I'm pretty open to a wide array of documentaries. And I feel like, honestly, if a filmmaker who actually knew how to make a film made this movie and actually learned how to direct the narrative, like, it might have been interesting to learn about his struggle with AIDS. It might have been interesting to learn what made him that way. Maybe someone tries to analyze why he was the way he was, where he was so addicted to sex and like the human form and stuff, and maybe we could look at his art for longer because his art was actually really
what influenced his art, what his art influenced.
Right. Instead it was just, I had freaky sex in Paris and I was 14 years old and got fucking sodomized by Antonio. It's like fantastic. And there's a lot of titties in the movie.
Yep. So, are we gonna Risk it. Risk it all.
Alright, everybody. Now it's time for our third and final show of the night. Show, movie, or documentary, or whatever. So,
Okay, let's
what's going on? Let's hope we don't have to do like a 6-hour Ken Burns documentary or something.
Hopefully, if it's anything long, it's foreign, so we can veto it.
So, Aiden, what are your thoughts? Last film of the night, or whatever it is.
I know we're gonna get fucked and sucked 5 ways to fucking Sunday.
All right, here we go.
Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad. Oh no.
What is it?
Shikari, 1991. When Shankar, who performs on the road with partner Chanchal and the elephant Apu, falls for a Russian circus performer, jealousy's... No! Oh. What the fuck was that called?
Oops. Well, looks like we're just gonna have to restart.
Wait, hold on.
Oh god. Oh, good. It's called like Shiari.
Russian...
Well, looks like we're gonna.
Here it is. Shikari. Let's see if this is actually in English, though. It certainly does not look English.
2 hours and 42 minutes.
Oh, please don't be in English. It doesn't seem... Oh.
Air
The
India.
government of India.
Skip ahead. It's a 1970s Indian movie.
Yeah, that's almost 3 hours. Oh, I'm vetoing this shit so hard.
Veto. Why the hell is this on Netflix?
What the fuck is this?
I don't have a clue.
Anyway. I know, we already told them about our veto system. We can keep it.
Alright, well, veto system comes into effect. Everyday L.
Oh, 1 season. It's a show. Okay. Okay, that's good. Everyday Elevated with Sharon Hochman. 1 season. On Amazon. Sharon is a highly acclaimed chef, both on-screen and off, and the founder of Hawks, a line of gourmet sauces and seasonings. In Everyday Elevated, a digital series for Cooking Panda, Sharon shows
Did we even review this?
transform everyday foods into healthy meals with a flair and elevate mundane dishes.
Alright, I don't know how we're gonna review this.
Oh, it's only 2 minutes long, bro.
Okay, no, we're not. We're gonna skip it. I didn't realize that it would pick any bullshit off of Amazon.
Maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get Guys Grocery Games.
Spin again, dude.
Okay, 2
Spin
minutes
again.
is a little short. Oops.
I-
Stupid. The Little Hours. Oh.
Hour 30, a romantic comedy.
We could have watched a 2 minute.
How are we gonna...
Wait! This might not be English. There's always a chance.
Dude, none of this shit is there a way to, like, we gotta refine these settings.
Garfangana, Italy, 1347. The handsome servant Macento, fleeing from his vindictive master, takes shelter in a nunnery.
What the
This
hell?
does not seem...
Wait, what the hell? It's just, I haven't even logged into Netflix on this computer. How the fuck are...
You're logged in on Mom's account. Is this English or not?
Traditional
John C. Reilly.
form of song.
Right.
Did you do that?
I
Graphic nudity, sexual content. Okay, well, I guess The Little Hours is our film.
Yippee.
Can't we just back it up and watch the 2 minute cooking show?
Watch it. What? Spin again. Let's find something that isn't boring as shit.
Nope. This is our
No,
fate.
spin again.
This is our fate.
Editing, dude. We can edit it out and just pretend
I
it's...
can't cheat.
This is not even entertaining to talk about. It's a romantic comedy starring John C. Reilly. I guess maybe it would be.
I don't think it stars John C. Reilly. I think he's a supporting.
Oh,
character.
2017. I thought it said 2007. When was this fucking made?
2017.
Oh.
Medieval black comedy film written by the guy who directed nothing.
How much money did this movie make?
Starring Alison Brie, Dave Franco, Aubrey Plaza, John C. Reilly, Molly Shannon. What the fuck? Box office 1.6 million. Oh no. Oh, no.
How is it rated? What's the critical reception telling us?
Oh my god. Look
Positive reviews from critics.
Nick Offerman's there.
Maybe it'd be fine.
It can't be that bad, right? Right? Fred Armisen. This is like some sort of weird SNL reunion special. With, like, also...
The only person really in SNL was the one guy.
I'm sure some of these other people are. Lauren Weedman.
It's a Parks and Recreation reunion too.
That guy looks like he's like bald Daniel Craig.
Yeah, kinda.
Okay, well, what streaming service is this on?
Netflix. What is this called again?
The Little Hours is our movie, our last movie. See you in 1 hour and 30 minutes.
Yippee. Well, we just watched our final movie of the night, The Little Hours, starring a bunch of TV actors, John C. Reilly and Dave Franco. So, Aiden, what is the plot of The Little Hours?
The Little Hours, Dave Franco is a guy who got his balls sucked, and after that he gets sent to a church to be the gardener, where he has to pretend he's deaf.
He actually goes
For
into
some reason.
hiding. John C. Reilly's mad at him.
And all the nuns are fucking bad people. Alison Brie is a slut. Aubrey Plaza is a witch and a lesbian. And that girl from Raising Hope is a lesbian and a Jew. And they all have sex and get drunk, and they're bad people.
Yeah, they have a witch ceremony where they're all running around naked.
And it's not funny. So Connor, what did you think of The Little Hours?
This movie... Well, I want to start out by saying this movie on Letterboxd had an average of 3 stars and very little 5, 4, 1, and 2 stars, which I gotta point out is very unusual because Letterboxd is normally like
5 or 1.
it's either 5 stars or half stars, and then you look at everything in the middle and it's kind of like a little staggered hoop. And then everything, and then like the half star is usually like this much, and the 5 stars this much, because people are retarded and don't understand that, you know, movies go on a spectrum. But I think that's very indicative of what this movie is. I didn't give it 3 stars on Letterboxd, I gave it 2, which I feel like kind of sums up my feelings on this movie in a very general way. Follow me on Letterboxd. Links in the channel bio. But anyways, this movie, it's really hard to pin a genre on because there's a lot of comedy. There's a lot of like stuff that's supposed to be comedy in it, which doesn't really land. It doesn't not land either. It's not like cringe. It's just like, I sit there and it's like the nuns are swearing, which to me isn't particularly funny. Like lewd nuns, it's not particularly funny nor unfunny to me. So I kind of just pass it off. There are some drama elements, although I don't really like. I guess it kind of feels like in a way. It feels like something that would be like adapted to the stage or something. It feels a little bit
Does kind of feel like a play,
Shakespeare-y almost, or like a weird adaptation of a Shakespeare. Like I feel like that influence where it's like kind of a drama in ways, but also not. Maybe that's just because it's such a dry comedy. It's got like American Pie sex comedy elements because they're all having sex with Dave Franco. It might be a softcore pornography because every girl in this movie, bar Allison Brie, shows off their titties. I don't really know. I don't know what to say on the genre. The performances were okay. Like, I didn't hate the performances. A lot of them turned in what I would expect from them. I know a lot of these actors, none of them are like my favorite actors or anything. They were fine. The movie was shot neither good nor bad. It was shot fine. The film, it's really just meh. Like, it's incredibly meh to me. Like it wasn't super entertaining. It's not something I particularly watch, but it's not something like I really have a ton of grievances with, nor is it something I really like. It's very reminiscent of, say, like a British dry comedy, like the UK version of The Office. It's got some like Monty Python, except more modern and hornier aspects.
Yeah.
I just feel like if this film had a good cast, I feel like maybe if they kind of just took one of the genres and ran with it, it would have been a lot better, but I just didn't really know where anything stood on it. I definitely didn't hate it. I didn't have much to dislike in the movie, but I just also didn't have much to like, so I kind of just sat there and watched the movie and was like, okay. And then it was over and I was like, okay. The budget definitely went to the cast because the locations, it felt like they had like a ranch where they built a church on. They had a little castle set, and it all felt very stage play-y, where it was like one room kind of set. There's a scene at the end of the film, the final scene was shot day to night, and it's like the most glaring example. It looks like they shot it at 5 in the morning and tossed a Zack Snyder filter on it. That was pretty jarring. But overall, I didn't like it. I didn't hate it. It was very okay. It was very middle of the line. So Aiden, what did you think of... Jesus Christ. We're gonna have to get some zoom-ins of your face throughout this thing, because you're like, oh, like leaning on yourself.
That's how Little Hours makes me feel, Connor. The movie is
okay.
Nothing. It's supposed to be a dark comedy, which works sometimes. There are dark comedies I enjoy. This one is very dry. I don't know what's supposed to be funny. There were like very, very brief moments where you could tell that they were trying to be funny, but a lot of it is just mind-numbing. There's no humor in nuns swearing or fucking... Well, okay, there is humor in nuns swearing and like the priest drinking. Problem is, there's nothing like interesting or creative about it. There's a little bit of shock value, maybe, even though like for whenever this came out, 2018 or whatever the fuck standards, certainly was not the most shocking thing. Certainly does not have the shock value it did when the book was written, or whatever. It just feels so plain and ordinary. There's not a lot going on. There's no message. It's not really a satire. Like, you could tell a story like this and have it be a satire critique of Christianity, which the movie tries to do like once, if I'm being generous.
It never really critiques Christianity, nor does it like support Christianity. That seems like a very unimportant backdrop to this movie, but it's pretty much what makes everything essential.
And like the humor in the movie is all supposed to come from the shock value of like nuns swearing and having sex, I think. But even like the really horny 80s sex comedies were like they do really dumb physical humor, and this doesn't even do that. It's like this shit feels like someone stitched like 4 episodes together of some BBC miniseries that flopped and just released it as a film. Yes, the movie also flopped hard. But, I mean, technically, it's not incompetent. It's shot fine. Everyone's performances are fine. The day to night is bad, but like most of it just isn't that bad. It feels like some awkward middle ground of being unwatchably boring and being well shot enough to not be called unredeemable garbage.
You know what this movie feels
and
like?
what you're left with is the most mediocre film of all time.
This movie feels like a movie that would be part of the counterculture of like the 60s or 70s, and if it came out in those times it would be provocative and remembered, but since it came out in 2017,
this movie reminds
it felt like something that could have come out on the BBC, so it didn't really feel like anything special.
This movie reminds me a lot of the documentary we watched because it has no point, no focus, very little story. It's just a bunch of random shit happening that all ties together in the end, kinda. I don't know. It's not very good. It's pretty much the textbook definition of mediocrity in almost every single sense of the word. So, Connor, tonight we watched 3 movies, or 3 pieces of media. We watched an episode from the television show Seis Manos. We watched Antonio Lopez 1970 Sex, Fashion, and Disco. And we just finished The Little Hours. So, rank these movies from worst to best and tell us which ones you would stream.
Alright, my worst would have to be Antonio Lopez because that documentary was just a mess. It was boring, unfocused. It didn't have a very good narrative line, although I will commend it for being a pretty well put together documentary in terms of look and sound design. But it doesn't really save it from such a choppy narrative that it doesn't really go anywhere. It really doesn't do anything for me. Next, I would probably put Little Hours because it was kind of just meh. Wait. Next, I would probably put... What was that fucking anime called?
Seis Manos.
Next, I would put Seis Manos. The animation was choppy. It felt cheap. It felt like whoever made it wanted to make something, but they didn't really have the budget to do it very well. We also came in mid-series, so I couldn't really tell what was going on. The fight scenes were okay, but just from the taste I got, it wasn't really something that would interest me into continuing to watching. And finally, I would put Little Hours because, it was... I did like seeing the actors I knew. I don't think anyone put in a bad performance. I just think the movie couldn't find a genre and it was really something that wanted to be provocative but wasn't. And it would have been more of a provocative movie had it been like a 1970s like exploitation movie or something along the lines, where at this point it seems like something that would be a BBC special. Would I recommend streaming any of these? I would say no. I thought all three of the things we watched were pretty horrendous. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. I have a feeling this Netflix roulette show that we're doing, which is all streaming services, not just Netflix, but all the streaming services we have, not just Netflix. I feel like this show will be horrendous every time we do it, but I guess you guys will see reviews of very random shit you probably wouldn't have watched otherwise. Or
some hidden
in general.
gems, maybe.
We'll find hidden gems.
So
Aiden. So Aiden, how would you rank these films, and would you recommend streaming any of them?
Bottom for me, Little Hours. I do not like it at all. It is very, very mediocre. Exceptional in nothing. I wouldn't even go as far to say good in anything. It's watchable. It's tolerable. It barely tries, barely cares. And I just don't see anyone getting any value out of it. Next, I'll probably put Seis Manos. Seis Manos is a fucking mess. It's a Netflix original anime. The animation's choppy. The little glimpse I captured is not enticing for me to unravel what's going on in the story at all. And the action, despite having all the budget poured into it, still does not compare to anything that you could find on an actual anime. Again, it's pretty much a very mediocre range anime. And I don't know. It's also just not worth the investment. Despite how much I shit on Antonio Lopez, 1970s sex, fashion, and disco, there is a little more value in it than the others. The narrative is fucked. The interviews are generally poor. But despite that, it does manage to have very decent editing, sound design. They pick good tracks. It has a good flow to it, despite the flow being in purpose of a bad narrative. To the point where it's more interesting than the others when it is focused, when you do get to see pieces of his art or actually get glimpses into his life. There's definitely a lot of bad stuff in the documentary, and I wouldn't recommend watching any of these, but there are little nuggets of good in it that I just didn't see in the other two things that we watched.
So that was our first episode of Netflix Roulette. The series where we will randomly select a series of movies on the streaming service we own and review them for you guys to hear our thoughts on these obscure fucking
Random bullshit.
Korean dramas.
Oh yeah,
And
whatever that Korean drama was called, I put that below the Nun movie. Rain part fucking...
it probably, if
Whatever.
I could speak Korean, might not have been as bad as the other three, but...
From the, whatever, 10 minutes we saw, it
seems very culturally Korean.
dull.
So it seems hard to watch, but regardless, If you liked this video, let us know. We'll probably do more of these. Trying to diversify because it seems like just doing the standard drunk view.
It's difficult.
It's difficult because it's difficult. There's no new movies coming out. A lot of the shit they're dropping VOD looks like absolute dog shit. So why would I pay $20 to see dog shit when I could click a random button and see a dog shit movie from 2017 that made $1.5 million?
It's 1.6, Connie.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a different number.
So if you like this video, rip it off. Do it better than us.
And make your own video.
Do it better than us.
It's a good hobby.
It is fun. We've been doing Netflix Roulette for a long time. And I was like, yo, we gotta make a video out of this.
What if we just tortured ourselves?
What if we just tortured ourselves? And normally we have like a little veto technique, but we've adjusted the rules so foreign films can be vetoed. Just because there's no fucking way I'm sitting through a 2.5 hour 1970s Indian movie about a fucking
2 hours
elephant.
and 45 minutes.
The fact remains. The fact remains. Alright, well, that was all for today, guys. We'll see you next time for whatever the fuck we end up doing.